Good day. It's great to be here in the beautiful city of New Orleans once again, and to be with the World Trade Center. I want to thank my colleague, Consul General of Honduras, and the other Consul Generals who are here. And I have a link to New Orleans because my son spent 4 years attending Loyola University, and he graduated just in May. He didn't want to leave New Orleans. This guy's he's a global gypsy. I mean, he's lived in 8 countries. You know, you could parachute him in Mongolia, and he'd be doing a Mongolian barbecue with the locals. And so when he was re-entering back in the United States, I mean, he really fell in love with this city. And in fact, he decided to attend school in New Orleans after Katrina. And I told him I thought it was a bad mistake. I mean, Dad's friendly advice. I said, this city is destroyed. We had gone to come to see Loyola in the summer of '05. And right before Katrina, and then of course, you had this terrible tragedy, and I tried to convince him not to come, okay? And he said, hey, look, Dad, want to buy the stock cheap. And that's kind of the way he saw it. He had 4 great years in Loyola, and he decided to stay in town. He's working for a local company here. He's a marketing major. So I'm very proud of him. So I've had the opportunity over the last 5 years to come back, see the city at kind of rock bottom, and see it recover. And it's just quite amazing. I mean, I think sometimes when you live in the city, you don't realize what's been achieved, and what, credit to everyone in this great city. A city that was just too precious for America to lose. And so, I come here, work hard Thursday, Friday, but I'll be out in the streets starting on Saturday, okay? My wife's here too, but she's already out and about. But, and again, I think that, again, the World Trade Center, such an important role in this city. And I know they've gone through some difficult times, but I mean, that you have this organization that can bring so much value to making, connecting New Orleans to the world. And so, but I want to talk today a little bit about the Americas. The Americas is a home that we share from Alaska to Argentina. And it's a strategically vital, culturally rich, and widely diverse region. Our nations are linked together in ways beyond physical proximity. For the United States, the Americas are a vital interest, critical area. The economic ties between our countries are extremely robust. In 2009, total U.S. merchandise trade with Latin America and the Caribbean reached $524 billion. More than 40% of the region's exports flowed to the United States, making us the region's single largest export destination. The Western Hemisphere absorbs 42% of U.S. exports. 37% of all foreign investment in the region comes from the United States. And 10 of our 17 free trade agreements are with the nations within our region. These links are not only country to country, they tie individual people and small businesses together across national boundaries. Now, I'm sure that you're all familiar with the local hot sauce Tabasco, but you may know that the Michelini company had been sourcing peppers from Honduras for over 40 years and currently works with over 800 small farmers in Honduras, where I live and serve. In addition to economic ties with Latin America and the Caribbean, we share social and political views rooted in a common commitment to democracy, freedom, justice, and the respect for human rights. I would like to take a few moments to share with you how the U.S. government sees the Americas. We see a continent on the move that has made tremendous progress over the last 70 years. Recall that from 1940 to 1980, 40% of all changes of government in Latin America were through military coups. That number dropped to 20% during the 1980s. In the last 20 years, despite the fact that several presidents were not able to complete their terms of office, we have only seen 2 coups, one in Haiti and one where I was in Honduras, although I think we're way past that. The region has recovered on the economic side, from the lost decade of the 1980s, which was catastrophic from an economic point of view. As some of you may remember, this decade was marked by hyperinflation and stagnation. The reforms of the late 1980s and early 1990s brought about the policies of macroeconomic stabilization and trade opening that laid the groundwork for this progress. If I told you 10 years ago that leaders in the United States and Europe would be taking advice in economic management from some of our Latin American counterparts, you would not have believed me. Today, many of the region's governments have navigated steadily and responsibly through global and economic crisis and are well on their way to recovery. In fact, many of the, particularly if you look at South America, they're absolutely booming. That doesn't mean that everything is fine. Quite the contrary. There are still enormous challenges, particularly in terms of inequality, poverty, and social injustice, as well as concern that we have about the lack of democratic commitment of several governments in the region. In many ways, democratic institutions and institutions of governance are still weak. We can understand the challenges in the region, which we're approaching with our neighbors through an engagement in the hemisphere. Since its first days in office, the Obama administration has worked very hard to shift the balance in the U.S.-Latin American relationship in a positive and constructive direction. Evidence shows that this new strategy, which we call dynamic engagement, has contributed to a shift in Latin America public opinion. In a 2010 poll by the public opinion research firm Latino Barometro, 2/3 of the population in most countries in Latin America had a favorable view towards the United States. And this is an increase of 10 to 20% from 2008 levels. The role of the United States in Latin America is viewed overwhelmingly positive at this point. Our mission in the Americas is focused on 4 overarching priorities critical to people in every society: ensuring citizen safety, advancing social equity, securing clean energy, and mitigating the effects of climate change, and promoting expanded economic opportunity. We are carrying out this mission by building networks of constructive partnerships. I would now like to take the opportunity to share with you more details about each of these priorities and examples of our efforts throughout the region to pursue them. The first, safety of the hemisphere's citizens, critical issue. The 2010 poll that I mentioned confirmed that the greatest concerns of citizens throughout the hemisphere is achieving safety and security and combating the rise of crime and international crime. We also recognize that crime and violence has become a major challenge to Latin America's development. We understand that keeping our citizens safe goes far beyond combating the drug trade. It depends on effective and accountable institutions of governance and the strengthening of the rule of law. I mean, you can't have the right business climate without effective rule of law, without having effective institutions. It requires developing new networks of cooperation between governments at all levels so that our communities create the safe streets and neighborhoods that our people want and deserve. These issues shape our participation in such key security partnerships as the Mérida Initiative with Mexico, the Central American Regional Security Initiative with the 7 Central American countries, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative with the Caribbean countries, and our legacy of support to Colombia through the Colombia Strategic Development Initiative. Many of you, it's called commonly as Plan Colombia. They also help to guide our other diplomatic, law enforcement, security assistance, judicial reform, assistance on counterterrorism, and rule of law programs throughout the hemisphere. So you have a range of sub-regional programs that together form the architecture of how the United States works with the region on the issues of combating international crime. The United States and Mexico have built a especially close partnership through our cooperative law enforcement efforts to dismantle transnational organized criminal groups. We're partnering with Mexico to help institutionalize justice sector reforms, to sustain the rule of law and respect for human rights, and build a stronger institutional basis for combating the drug trade. In addition, the United States is increasing its own domestic law enforcement efforts to dismantle Mexican narcotics supply networks in our country and the smuggling of illegal financial proceeds and weapons from Mexico. The Central American Regional Security Initiative, or CARSE as it is called, seeks to do a number of things. First, to break the power, violence, and impunity of the nation's drug, gang, and criminal organizations. Second, to strengthen law enforcement and judicial institutions. Third, to foster community-based and social programs aimed at increasing the role of citizens to address criminal activities at the neighborhood level. And finally, to increase collaboration and information sharing by among these institutions with their U.S. law enforcement colleagues. The United States recognizes, of course, that tackling the problems of gangs and narco-trafficking is fruitless in the long run unless we also address the root causes of this instability. For that reason, U.S. policy in the region includes a focus on economic development. Through our foreign assistance programs, we're working to fight corruption, promote rule of law, and create the kind of democratic and just governance necessary to ensure that economic opportunities extend to all members of society. The Obama administration's focus on traditionally marginalized and excluded groups is an important aspect of our foreign policy in Latin America. Social justice and equality among all peoples of the Americas, including vulnerable populations, are critical to democratic stability. Through basic education and healthcare programs, we seek to expand the capability of all citizens to contribute to their societies. At the 2009 Summit of the Americas, President Obama endorsed the Inter-American Social Protection Network, which seeks to reduce poverty and improve social protection for all people in the hemisphere. Since Secretary Clinton launched the network in September 2009, it has played a significant role in expanding and improving social protection throughout the region. Through the sharing of best practices and technical training between countries, people in every country of the Americas have the opportunity to benefit from the region's innovations in social protection, such as conditional cash transfer programs, which provide subsidies to families on the condition that their children go to school and receive regular health care. A growing proportion of the poor are made up of women and children. Secretary Clinton has emphasized that improving the lives of women and girls is an important U.S. priority. When we talk about creating economic opportunity and working to eliminate social exclusion, we're also talking about ways we can work together to improve the lives of women, whether through increases in access to credit or by making communities safer for girls and women. It is both the right and smart thing to do. Unfortunately, in too many places in our hemisphere, women are denied their rights and opportunities. As long as half the population is left behind, our hemisphere will be left behind too. We're also very much focused on addressing the interlinked challenges of energy, low-carbon economies, and mitigating the effects of climate change. Unless we really come to terms with those, it's going to be very difficult to have the kind of sustainable development that we foresee for the future. Fortunately, the Western Hemisphere has a comparative advantage in the development of renewable energies and is attracting a broader range of interested partners, institutions, and private business. In order to work for this goal, at the 2009 Summit of the Americas, President Obama launched a hemisphere-wide initiative called Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, or ECPA. ECPA is a framework for working collaboratively to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy, develop cleaner fossil fuels, enhance energy infrastructure, reduce energy poverty, reduce emissions from deforestation, and adapt to the impacts of climate change. In Honduras, we're promoting the use of solar, wind, hydro, and biomass under the missions My Embassy's Renewable Energy Cooperation Initiative. We want to make Honduras a hub for the development of renewable energy. We're also heeding the President's call to expand U.S. clean energy exports by supporting U.S. companies invest in Honduran renewable energy. For example, President Lobo, President of Honduras, and I, about 3 weeks ago, cut the ribbon on what is the second largest wind energy investment in all of Latin America, in Honduras, in a place called It's Cerro de Ula, just south of Tegucigalpa. It's a 105 megawatt wind farm. And I just want to tell you, the generators, the wind turbines will all be manufactured in Pennsylvania in the United States. It's a $300 million export for the US. So there's a partnership right there. Trade, as I said, cannot be an effective engine for expanding economic opportunities unless its benefits are distributed through all levels of society. Pathways to Prosperity. Pathways to Prosperity is a hemispheric initiative to help countries share best practices for spreading the benefits of economic growth more broadly. The Pathways is an initiative that brings together 13 countries, countries that have free trade agreements with each other, that the United States has free trade agreements. That would include Canada, it would include Mexico, it would include the CAFTA countries, Central American countries, such as Honduras. Peru is a member of Pathways, Colombia, Panama, Chile, and they all work together. It's an initiative that my boss, Secretary Clinton, has been very active in to really try to harmonize our economic practices. I mean, it could be on a regulatory issues, it could be trade issues, it could be investment promotion issues. So this is a major initiative for the Secretary and for the administration. You know, one Pathways to Prosperity best practice that we've worked on in my embassy is to promote financial inclusion through what's called secured transaction reform. Put simply, secure transaction laws allow small businesses and entrepreneurs in Latin America to use assets like tractors or sewing machines or collateral for loans, as collateral for loans. Such reforms help small businesses gain access to the credit they need to lower interest rates, which is an important part of small business formalization and job creation. So by having that law, people who really were totally outside of the credit markets, but were incredibly dynamic and entrepreneurial people, now have access. And again, I'm very proud that Honduras, the U.S. working with the United States, has become a regional leader in this area with the assistance of the U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation. The government of Honduras enacted secured transactions reform and established a privately administered online registry. And when the registry just came on live at the end of just last month, January 28th, it began receiving asset registrations on its first day. This reform will really do a lot to provide the banking community information about small business people. So again, huge. You know, sometimes prior to this, the only way you get credit in Honduras is through real estate. So if you don't have any real estate, you are pretty much out of the market. You may have a great idea. You may be a tremendously, you know, have a great business idea, but without access to credit, you weren't going to move forward. And by the way, again, just like in the United States, you know, small businesses provide, you know, the vast majority of employment in Latin American countries. You know, another issue that's very important is remittances. Remittances, that is the money that Latin Americans who live in this country send back to their relatives. These remittances taken together account for $50 billion a year that, again, that these folks send, living here and working here in the United States, send back to their relatives in Latin America. What we're trying to do in the administration is we're trying to build new ways to leverage remittances to expand credit for development and infrastructure projects. You know, last September, Secretary Clinton signed agreements with Honduras and El Salvador, outlining the United States' commitment to an initiative called Building Remittance Investment for Development Growth. It's called BRIDGE, the BRIDGE Initiative. Under the BRIDGE Initiative, financial institutions in Honduras and El Salvador will be able to partner with the United States and multilateral institutions to help explore options to use these remittance flows as an asset to raise lower cost and longer term financing for infrastructure, public works, and commercial development initiatives without impacting the basic for remittances. So the idea is to get this financial flow and you get part of it that can be used in foreign direct investment. And so the way I look at it in terms of, you know, U.S. business is I think this is going to open up opportunities for public-private partnerships, where maybe U.S. companies can invest in a range of infrastructure projects using this capital that will be available. And it's big capital. I mean, just Honduras alone. Honduras is a small economy, mind you. It's a $14 billion economy. But remittances last year were $2.5 billion. So if you could just tap a percentage of that and channel it into direct investment, it'll be great for the development of Honduras, and it also will present some business opportunities for you folks. Obviously, along with these strategic priorities, the President remains steadfast in our commitment to robust democratic institutions. Very little of what we might help accomplish in other areas will be sustainable or bring full benefit to people without the firm foundations of capable, legitimate, and responsive institutions. Our strong support for democratic governance and human rights is rooted in this fundamental fact. We all know what happened in Honduras. Honduras had a setback in terms of its democratic order back in 2009. But I think that our administration throughout took a principled stance, but also a pragmatic stance. And I am very proud of the fact that our administration worked very hard to ensure that there was a successful negotiated solution that ensured a peaceful and democratic solution to the Honduran crisis, number one. And number two, that the United States led the way in supporting for the holding of free and fair elections in Honduras that were held in 2009 at the end of November. And those elections, the Honduran people, who really were the heroes of the crisis, they sent a very powerful message. And they turned out to vote in big numbers. And they elected the opposition party, the National Party, and gave a very big mandate to President Lobo, the current president, and his National Party, as I said, with big majorities in Congress, as well as two-thirds of the mayoral seats around the country. I want to talk about, speaking of trade, I just want to mention that the Obama administration remains steadfast in its resolve to promote an American trade policy that works towards opening markets throughout the world to create new opportunities and higher standards of living for all Americans. It is our commitment to continue to try to find how we can move forward to have a free trade regime through the entire Americas. We already have free trade agreements, as I mentioned, with 10 countries in the Western Hemisphere. The United States has also signed free trade agreements with Colombia and with Panama, which still needs congressional approval, but President Obama will be working with Congress. Hopefully we can get these agreements approved this year. Meanwhile, we're ardently working to help U.S. companies take advantage of existing trade agreements. Latin America is a key region of the President's National Export Initiative. As part of his strategy for restoring strong economic growth in the United States, in his 2010 State of the Union address, President Obama called for doubling of U.S. exports by the end of 2014. An ambitious goal, by the way. The Department of State is actively working with other U.S. government agencies like the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, and U.S. business to help reach that target. Our embassies are active partners when U.S. companies need help overcoming challenges to selling overseas. We monitor the day-to-day practice and implementation of trade agreements to ensure that U.S. exports get the full benefits of these agreements. We work to eliminate foreign barriers to U.S. exports. We advocate for U.S. companies and economic policies that will improve the business climate for U.S. companies. We regularly engage with the U.S. business community with operations in host nations to listen to their concerns so that we can better serve them, serve you. According to the Department of Commerce, from January to October 2010, U.S. exports of goods and services to the Americas rose 27.5%. This is far higher than the worldwide export growth, which is estimated in 2010 to be 17%. So the Americas led the way. Before I finish, I would like to give you an update on the situation in Honduras. I spoke a little bit about it, but when I spoke to you last March, when I was here, President Lobo was just over a month in office. The Lobo administration inherited a catastrophic fiscal situation, a country that was very divided. The Honduran economy was very fragile. In 2009, Honduras' GDP declined 2.1%. Exports and investment plummeted, and unemployment and poverty levels were rising. President Lobo chose experienced technocrats for his economic team and made a new agreement with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, a top priority for his first year in office. The Honduran government took the tough but necessary measures and gained the credibility that eventually resulted in this international agreement with the International Monetary Fund that has resulted in $250 million of financial support from the World Bank and the IDB to help fill some of the budget caps that they were facing. Hondurans now realize that their country is now at a crossroads. They are ready to move forward beyond the global economic downturn and their own domestic political crisis in the aftermath of the crisis in June 2009. The government knows that now is the time to spur economic development. The Honduran Central Bank estimates that GDP growth for 2010 recovered from a decline of over 2% in 2009. It'll probably grow around 3% 2010, but their projections that GDP could grow 4 to 5% in 2011. I recently hosted a coffee at my residence for representatives of U.S. Fortune 100 companies who are in Honduras. Of the Fortune 100 U.S. companies, about 35 of them are in Honduras. They've been there for a very long time. They've made good money. They've been great corporate citizens. They've contributed in terms of jobs, exports, revenue, technology. And one of the things they told me that their businesses were hard hit in 2008, 2009, but that they began to see their bottom lines rebound in 2010. And they are very optimistic that the recovery will continue in 2011. That's what American companies throughout this crisis, not one major American company that I'm aware of ever left. I mean, American companies, like I said, they've made good money in Honduras because they've always had the long-term vision. They've been through depressions, they've been through political crisis, through natural disasters, but that long-term view has ensured that, first of all, they're good corporate citizens, but at the end of the day, that's the best thing for the bottom line. I do say that, economic growth doesn't come in a vacuum. Governments have to create conditions that favor investment and job growth. I think that President Lobo and his team understand this. They have worked closely with their Congress to implement strategic elements to improve the investment climate in Honduras. In 2010, Honduras passed a public-private partnership law and a law allowing for the hiring of temporary and part-time workers. The Honduran National Congress is currently reviewing a new law for the promotion and protection of investment. We all know that there's strong competition for foreign investment. For this reason, in addition to improving the legal framework for investors, the Honduran government is organizing an investment conference called Honduras is Open for Business. It will take place May 5 and 6 in the business capital, San Pedro Sula. I believe that private industry will be the driving force for a better Honduras. And so by the way, I'm carrying an invitation, and you'll hear it here first before I meet the mayor tomorrow. But there's an invitation from President Lobo for the mayor, and maybe he can bring a business delegation to come down to Honduras and attend this important investment conference. But again, in conclusion, I want to reiterate the importance of our partnership with Latin America. Latin America represents both a challenge and an opportunity for the United States. It is a region where continued U.S. engagement is necessary for our well-being, given its geographic proximity, the presence of many people of Latin American origin in the United States, and its importance as a market for American products and services. We are forging a new vision for U.S. policy that is respectful, responsive, and realistic. I am confident that our continued involvement will be positive in terms of the regions and our own future. And I believe that cities like New Orleans and states like Louisiana are really at the vanguard of this effort. You have the links, you have in the case of Honduras, you know, we're blessed here to have one of the largest Honduran American communities in New Orleans, Louisiana. I consider Louisiana and Honduras sister states. The relationship goes back to the 19th century. So I think New Orleans, with its great port, with this geographic proximity, I mean, you're ideally positioned not only to work in countries like me, where I am in Honduras, but to work across the hemisphere. So again, great to be back. And I don't know, open for any questions, comments. Yes, sir.
Ambassador, considering the downturn in the U.S. economy, the budget reduction measures that are being proposed by the administration and by Congress, how do you see the foreign assistance that we're giving to countries like Honduras? Do you see a downturn in that, and what's all of that fallout?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. Look, there are going to be cuts. I mean, yeah, there are going to be cuts across the board. So I'm expecting it's going to be. I was with Secretary Clinton. She invited all of our ambassadors. It was a global ambassadors conference that we had about 2.5 weeks ago. I was in D.C., spent a lot. We had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with her. What I found, first of all, she brought us all. This is unique. You had about 180 ambassadors running around Washington. It was kind of a unique situation. But what she had is this idea of what she calls a quadrennial diplomatic development review, QDDR, where we're really looking at our diplomatic and development strategy over a 4-year period. Very much doing what the military does. I mean, what she's trying to do is be able to sell the case to Congress that what we bring as a foreign affairs community, the agencies, the State Department and the other agencies, USAID, that we bring a lot of bang for the buck for the taxpayer. So that was one of the reasons for this conference, and she laid out her vision of what she wants to do with the quadrennial review. And she also asked for the ambassador's input. So it was like a working conference where we took her basic vision and we went into working groups in different areas: business promotion, economic development, dealing with conflictive regions of the world, all of that. And we sort of gave her our input back from the field for this document that she's developing. But certainly, you know, we would argue that, you know, look, I'll tell you, you know, Honduras, you take, we've got a staff of 400 people in our embassy. We have 14 U.S. Government agencies operating in the country in our embassy. But the total cost to the taxpayer, that is all the salaries, all the benefits, the light bill, everything to do with our embassy, the housing for our people, the security costs $25 million a year. So just, you know, and this is a country that, I mean, Honduras is a country that, as Secretary Clinton always reminds me, hey, Hugo, it's an hour and a half from Miami. You know, the U.S. doesn't have a margin for a country like Honduras to have a severe problem, to be unstable. You know, we have as a country, the richest, most powerful country in the history of the world. We have an obligation that as a good neighbor, that our closest friends share in that prosperity. That'll be a tremendous indictment on America in terms of its history. If we, you know, how are we going to affect change 10,000 miles away if we are unable to affect positive change in a country that's an hour and a half flight from Miami or a 2.5-hour flight from New Orleans? So to do that, we need to have the resources. And I would argue that the diplomatic and development resources, when you compare it to for example, what the Pentagon spends, and I'm not arguing against, I know we need to have the resources. You know, we're fighting 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we need to have the resources for our service men and women to get the job done. But our diplomatic corps and our development people are all over the world every day. When you're in Egypt, the front line are our diplomats. It's not. And so I think that we need to put those resources, and I hope that, I'll be perfectly honest, I think there'll be some cuts. I hope we are successful if we can show Congress that we do have a strategic vision and that our diplomatic dollars are worth it, that we can sustain as much as we can. Again, remember, I think the State Department has just about the smallest budget in the U.S. government. Remember that, of any other department. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the quadrennial review. It sounds like it's based somewhat on the QDDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review. Do you have any feel at all for when the first one might come out? And will it also be published to the public as is the QDR?
The QDDR, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the secretary, from her experience in the Armed Services Committee, she learned over the years as a senator the way that the Pentagon would come in with kind of a vision. That was a multi-year vision. This is what we want to accomplish. And it made it easier on the Hill so that the congressmen, the senators, and the representatives could really look and say, hey, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. And I think she's trying to have that same strategic approach with regards to the State Department. Oh, yeah, the QDDR will be rolled out as a document which you, I mean, I think you can possibly go into the State Department website and go in there, and at least you can get a copy of the executive summary. I've been doing this for 30 years. It's quite an interesting approach.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you talked a little bit about some of the challenges with stability, particularly in Honduras. Could you talk a little bit about Venezuela and policy towards Venezuela moving forward?
Well, look, again, I'm not, I don't make policy towards Venezuela, but clearly we have concerns about democracy in Venezuela, about, people assuming too much political power, the lack of checks and balances, there are human rights issues involving Venezuela. So we have strong concerns, and we're working very closely, with, the democratic community, with the OAS to make sure that our views are known when there are violations in terms of the violation of democratic norms in terms of human rights. But this is not, what you want to avoid is you don't want to make this just a U.S.-Venezuela issue. That's what Chavez is looking for. He wants to make it so that, and we're not going to do that. We're going to be very smart. I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you look at economic policies, you look at South America and you see how well so many of the countries are doing that have adopted market-based economic policies and trade opening policies. They've been very successful. You look at countries like Venezuela and you can come to your own conclusions, but I think over time, there's a physics to living in this world. And I would argue if you have the right policies, and that means democracy. What's democracy? Democracy is that the government of the people is really doing what the people want, and they're really responding to the people's needs, and those institutions are getting things done. It's about transparency. It's about fighting corruption. It's about government, local government as well, being in contact with the people and serving the people that elect them. So that's number one. Number two, we all know from the collapse of the Soviet Union that socialism does not work. It's been a catastrophic failure. And that markets, I'm not saying that markets are perfect. We can talk about our own country. We're imperfect, sure. But I think when you look at the totality of history, you look back and the markets and competitiveness and letting the private sector being the engine of growth, the physics will tell the story. Let's just watch South America over the next 5-10 years, and we'll see who are the successful countries, who are the countries that are going to generate, generate the growth, the jobs, the technology. And those are the countries, we will partner with those countries who believe in free trade, those countries who believe in democracy, who have the same vision that we do, that democracy, imperfect as it is, it's the best system of government. Okay? Yes?
I'd like to know a little bit about the reinstatement to the order. How is that? Where is that?
Good, great question.
Been going back and forth?
Yeah, Honduras, I think the government, President Lobo, has made has had great success in restoring diplomatic relations with most of its partners. It's got obviously great relations with the United States, has great relations with Canada, with Mexico, with all of the Central American countries, all of it except for Nicaragua, okay? I'll leave that there. No comment, yeah. And then good relations with Colombia, with Chile, Peru, and South America, and also with the European Union, very strong relationships with the European Union. These are traditional partners, Japan. If you look at Honduras' diplomatic balance sheet, it's come a long way. But the OAS is kind of one last piece. I mean, I'm hopeful, first of all, the Honduran people, you don't achieve anything by excluding Honduras. Honduras is an American nation. They ought to be at the table with the OAS. And you're not going to achieve anything by excluding the Honduran people and the Honduran government, elected by its people, in any way. So our hope is, we've lobbied very hard for it, and we're hopeful that in the next couple of months, Honduras will be back where it ought to be in the OAS, okay? It's the right thing to do, and they deserve it, okay?
The Honduras exclusion from the OAS, has that hurt any financial aid from international organizations like IMF? If they're not an active member of the OAS, does that have anything to do?
No, that's a great question. The fact that they're not a member of the OAS in terms of dollars and cents hasn't really impacted. We worked very hard, the U.S., on that. After President Lobo assumed office in January of 2010, I was the first, under instructions for the president and the secretary, I was the first ambassador to go see him the day after he assumed office. And the Secretary Clinton had announced that the constitutional democratic order had been restored, and we've restored all of our development assistance. We've got a very active development portfolio through USAID, through Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, both on the civilian side and on the military side. And obviously all the security assistance, law enforcement to fight that international crime I was talking about. But also, the U.S., as you know, is the biggest shareholder in the World Bank, in the Inter-American Development Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. So we've worked very hard to get those flows going, and they're going, they're normalized. Honduras got that IMF program, obviously because they took the right economic policies, but they're getting strong support from the IMF, and they're getting strong development and financial support from the World Bank and the IDB. So one thing doesn't have, it really hasn't impacted. Honduras is a very poor country. I mean, you don't fool around. I mean, if you cut aid, you're going to hurt a lot of people. We don't want to do that. Okay? Oh, yes.
Ambassador, thank you. My name is Richard Sieg. I work for Intermarine as a shipping company. We mainly focus on infrastructure projects, power projects, petrochemical, and I'm proud to say we're actually carrying the windmill equipment into Honduras that you were talking about earlier. Just wondering, with the budget cuts that the gentleman was mentioning earlier, how you see Exim Bank financing and some of the other financing programs that are available in supporting trade into Honduras and the rest of South America as well going forward?
No, that's a great question. I mean, Exim Bank plays a critical role for U.S. business in terms of making sure that we can stay competitive in international markets. Let me give you an example. The Exim Bank, this large wind project that President Lobo and I cut the ribbon on 3 weeks ago, that project it's a $300 million project, but $160 million of those have been financed by Exim Bank. Now, knowing how credit market look today, to try to get $160 million package in Honduras, a country that just come through a political crisis, high risk, banks are holding back, very difficult. So Exim Bank was really was the catalyst in getting this thing going. So this is one example, and what's going to be a very large, significant U.S. export, and the fact that we have U.S. manufactured generators coming in. It's not just about Honduras. If you could show in Costa Rica, in Panama, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, the Central American market is 50 million people. You can show that can have an impact in wind projects for U.S. companies. So it sort of adds up. It's not just one $300 million project. So this is an example. I think Exim Bank is absolutely crucial. I mean, I'm not up to in terms of, how, their portfolio in terms of the region. But I would just say that the way they worked in Honduras with all the risks, political risks that we have, show me that they're very aggressive. And, when the bottom line, they can see that the U.S. export, if you have export content, this project has 88% U.S. export content. They're going to be very aggressive in promoting helping the U.S. companies. Okay? Thank you very much.